Hey folks, welcome back. I'm JB Shreve with The End of History and theendofhistory.net. And so we've been looking at this thing called Christian nationalism, right? What it is, what it's not, and why it's a really big problem. And hopefully the past two episodes helped you out in distinguishing what is Christian nationalism and what it is not. Today, in this final episode, I want to look at why this is a problem, why you want to avoid this thing at all cost. And I think I've already demonstrated that from the political perspective, all right, this is something you want to avoid. We saw how this thing tends to end politically in the last episode. So I'm not going to go too far down that road today. What I want to look at here in this last episode, why this is a really dangerous thing for Christians specifically to grab onto. And I'm saying that as a Christian, as a person very politically, very socially aware, and even engaged. If you've made it this far in this series, well, I hope that I've gained at least a little bit of your trust that my intentions are good here, and this is ultimately, truly a big warning call. Let me start by giving you a few examples of Christian nationalism that we see among politicians and so-called Christians today, okay? When I say so-called Christians, I'm meaning people and politicians who use the language, the code words of their faith in their speeches, in their politics, but the rest of their lifestyle is absent any signs of true faith. Now, that's not a measurement of my choosing. Jesus said to beware of false prophets who come like wolves in sheep's clothing. Their intent is to deceive. The intent of these people, of these wolves, is to deceive and lead people astray for their own interests. That's what wolves do. He also said you can judge the truth of a lifestyle by looking at the fruit it produces. So again, not going too deep down that pathway, but let's just take a few examples, look at a few examples, and there could be a lot more of these, but this is just a sampling, all right? This one right here, this is Kari Lake. She's a candidate for the Senate out of Arizona. She's jumped pretty hard on the Trump and the Christian nationalism bandwagons since she left her job in the news media to begin a political career. Now, while she was a news anchor, she liked to stir up controversy with provocative stuff that was often misleading at best, and she frequently had to apologize for misinformation she either reported or posted on her social media. Her bosses made her do that. Earlier this spring, I think it was in April 2024, she began to encourage her supporters to get prepared for a rough 6 months that were coming. And she encouraged her supporters, she said, strap on your Glocks. And she described the Glocks, a Glock handgun, right, as the armor of God. This is what we see in the New York Times here. So, depending on where you stand, this is either really subtle or really obvious. If you're anti-Kari Lake, then you're outraged that she's encouraging supporters to strap on Glocks to confront their political opponents, all right? If you're pro-Kari Lake, then you're thinking, hey, this isn't that big of a deal. She's being provocative. She's not being serious. But if you're a person of faith, at the very least, your warning flags should start going up when you hear her using terms like put on the whole armor of God. That's a reference from Ephesians, right? And then equating that with wearing a Glock to handle political stress that's coming. How about this one? This is a congresswoman out of Colorado. She's a congressman, and I'm not going to get into her personal life. Feel free to go look at it. There's some doozies out there when it comes to this one. If you want to look at the fruit of her life, go look it up. But she made the statement. She says, the church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. So that the government's not supposed to direct the church. Duh. No duh right there, right? But the other part of that statement where that says the church is supposed to direct the government, that's real clear Christian nationalist sentiment and thought right there. If you get confused about it, this is the little test I like to use. Is this something ISIS would agree with about their religion? If it is, you know it's probably not a good idea, and it's not biblical. We Christians, we're supposed to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. But the idea that we're supposed to rule the world, well, that's a slippery slope. This is where the lure of power comes in, and it usually ends really, really badly. Now, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, I've mentioned this in earlier episodes, but if you haven't already, go grab my book, Politically Incorrect, Real Faith in an Era of Unreal Politics. Read about this. There's a whole section of that book that gets into the theology and the politics of power and how this is ultimately a trap that the darkness uses to seduce well-meaning people in the political arena. Now, I gave some examples in the last episode, but I think think about when Satan tempted Jesus in the wilderness. This was the bait. This was the temptation. This was what Jesus walked away from. And instead of taking on the power of this world and falling for that temptation, instead he went and died on a cross. That's a pretty big contrast there. The lure of power is not actually the pathway for Christians. Be very, very careful here. Now, of course, one of the most famous and to me patronizing one is former President Donald Trump. Now, I get that this is controversial and it's going to turn people off right here, but I'm not saying you can't be a Christian and also vote for Donald Trump. That's not my point, not at all. Vote for whoever you want to vote for, but don't vote for Donald Trump because you think this is an action in line with your Christian faith. This is former President Trump. It was during the Black Lives Matter protests that hit Washington, D.C. near the end of his term. As all of this resentment in the media and some parts of the country was building against him, President Trump goes outside the White House, middle of the day, stands in front of the church, and he just stands there, holding a Bible. The media goes crazy, taking pictures, capturing video, and the only thing President Trump says is, "It's a Bible." That's it. What do you think he's doing there? He's sending the codes. Christians, stand by me because I stand with the Christians. Now, if you're one of those who think Donald J. Trump is a good Christian, not a lot I can do for you right there. I don't think he even goes that far, and this is a guy who's not afraid to embellish quite a bit. Remember, Christian nationalism is not about real faith. It's about tribalism. It's about power. And that's the problem. Jesus said you can't serve two masters. You're going to end up loving one and hating the other. And when you try to pair nationalism with faith, you're going to find that nationalism is a very fickle, a very jealous, false god. Once you start going down that pathway, you're going to find you step by step, slowly but surely, you begin compromising the values of the Christian faith for the sake of political power. I pointed out 3 politicians here in this episode, but there are a lot of leaders of so-called Christian organizations who have done this very same thing. They spout the language of faith, the language of the Bible, but it's really about power, and it's really pretty gross. You read throughout the Gospels and you see Jesus and the early church's compassion for the weak, for the strangers, or what we would call immigrants and refugees today. You see the value and mercy for the poor and for the oppressed. It's not just in the New Testament. You see this in the Old Testament, in the prophets, all throughout the Bible. We're going to get deeper into this in my upcoming podcast series on the politics of God. But compare these values of mercy, of compassion, of justice, charity, and those are all extremely biblical. With the pursuit, you compare those with the pursuit of power that you see in politics today, specifically in politics that claims to be Christian, and it's just bad stuff. That's how compromise works. That's how you start to serve one God and you start to hate the other. And that's how you enter into the pathway of deception. Now I'm going to stop right here. This is enough to at least get you thinking. I hope when it comes to Christian nationalism, it's not, you recognize it's not just bad, it's evil, all right? Believers out there need to run from this devil. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have something hateful to say, go ahead and leave that in the comments too. Always nice to see someone saying hateful things because I've offended their Christian principles. But for those who want to keep going on this thought process, be on the lookout for that new podcast series, The Politics of God. That's coming very soon at theendofhistory.net. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon.